Right. Act 4, Scene 4, the longest of the 5 short scenes of Act 4, or I should say, probably the longest. Most editions of the play printed these days, you're probably, odds are, you're looking at a copy of Hamlet where 4.4 has 66 lines in it. If you've got an older copy of the play, then this scene might only have 31 lines in it, or possibly even only 8 lines. If you've got one of those and you're wondering why that is, well, I'll explain more about that in a bit. First, let's run through the full 66 line version of 4.4. So. Hamlet is on his way to the ship for England, guarded by Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who are, unbeknownst to Hamlet, and it's not totally clear, but very probably unknown even to themselves, are bearing a letter from Claudius to the King of England, saying, when you read this, kill that guy Hamlet. So Hamlet is, as far as we know, going to his death. Whether Rosencrantz and Guildenstern know what that letter says is very much an open question. Claudius would have had no need to tell them. I mean, you two schlubs, you go ahead and give this letter from me to the King of England. They're not going to dare open it, and you have no obligation to tell them what's inside. Kings sent secret communications to each other all the time. So keep that in mind. They don't necessarily know the full extent of their mission here. Anyway, they're headed to the ship for England, and on the way, who should they pass, or rather, who should they just miss, but that Fortinbras guy that we've been hearing about since way back in the very first scene. Young Fortinbras of unimproved metal, hot and full, as Horatio calls him in 1.1, right? Even before we hear about Hamlet, Prince Hamlet, Hamlet Jr. himself, we hear about this ongoing beef between Denmark and Norway, because many years ago, Hamlet Sr., the king whose ghost has been flying around, killed Fortinbras Sr., the King of Norway, in single combat, and as a result of this, Denmark got a bunch of Norway's land. We are told in 1.1 that Fortinbras Jr. Is all grown up and wants revenge. All right, that remember, there is not only one son who wants revenge in this play. The number just keeps growing, though we haven't heard anything about him yet. Remember, Polonius, who got killed in 3.4 by Hamlet, accidentally, has a son named Laertes, who's been off at college in France since way back in Act 1, Scene 3. Presumably, he's not going to be happy when he gets the news. So we've got him on our mind as well. But who we've actually got on the stage in 4.4 is Fortinbras Jr., the Hamlet's mirror, essentially. Hamlet's mirror in Norway, the other living son of a dead king, living princely son of a dead king after whom he is named. Right here in Denmark, we've got dead King Hamlet Sr. and living Prince Hamlet Jr. Over there in Norway, we've got dead King Fortinbras Sr., dead courtesy of Hamlet Sr., and living Prince Fortinbras Jr. These two guys whose whole lives have been mirrors of each other, who would have been hearing about each other for their whole lives, Hamlet Jr. and Fortinbras Jr., but who have never met, just miss meeting in 4.4. Right after line 8, Fortinbras exits the stage at one side, and just half a heartbeat later, Hamlet, flanked by Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and etc., enters at the other side of the stage. So very important visual there. Hamlet, Prince Hamlet and Prince Fortinbras are never on stage at the same time, at least not while they're both alive. They miss each other by that much in 4.4. The Norwegian army, led by Prince Fortinbras, is on its way to the promised march over his kingdom that we heard about according to the arrangement brought back by Voltimand in 2.2, that they're, as long as he's got an army all ready and everything, might as well go attack Poland. But they'd like Claudius's permission to march that army right through Denmark on the way, permission that Claudius gave. They're on their way to attack Poland. Fortinbras leaves right before Hamlet comes on, and instead Hamlet has a conversation with Fortinbras's captain. Whose powers are these? How purposed, sir? Who commands them? The answers being Norway against Poland and Prince Fortinbras, in that order. The captain, at Hamlet's request, elaborates that, truly to speak, we go to gain a little patch of ground that hath in it no profit but the name. To pay 5 ducats, 5, I would not farm it, nor will it yield to Norway or the Pole a ranker rate should it be sold in fee. In other words, we're going to fight the Norwegian army is going to fight the Polish army over a totally worthless little scrap of land. There's no, precious metals or jewels there. You can't grow anything on it. Totally worthless. Hamlet logically responds, why then the Polak never will defend it, in line 23. By the way, it's been used before, and I think I've forgotten to mention, though the word Polak is objectionable now, and people from Poland would be referred to as Poles. That was just the normal word for a Polish person in Shakespeare's time. He meant no offense. Why then the Polak never will defend it, Hamlet observes, to which the captain replies, yes, it is already garrisoned. No, they're going to fight us over it. Their whole army, or a big section of it, is there waiting to fight us. Hamlet is amazed by this. 2,000 souls and 20,000 ducats will now debate the question of this straw. Amazed that so many lives and so much money are all going to be thrown away fighting over a scrap of land that no one wants just for the sake of fighting over it. And he uses a difficult metaphor, but one of his best. I think, starting at line 23, this is the posthume of much wealth and peace that inward breaks and shows no cause without why the man dies. So an imposthume, or abscess, something infected inside the body, so that can suddenly burst, and the person dropped dead, even though from the outside he looked fine. Hamlet is comparing quote, much wealth and peace to such an imposthume or abscess. In other words, when a country, the implication here is, has a bunch of extra money and hasn't had a war in a while, it will find an excuse to have one just to show that it can, or showing no cause why the man dies, or people dying for no reason or no apparent reason. So we've got, in addition to a great observation about politics, also a yet another image or figure of speech that relates to this what's on the inside versus what's on the outside stuff, a difference or a mismatch between what is actually going on inside someone versus what appears to be true on the outside. In terms here of health and sickness, sick on the inside, but apparently healthy on the outside. Whereas at other parts in the play up till now, it's been about guilt and innocence, or smiling in your face, acting like your friend, but having a guilty secret. The captain, after explaining this, trots off to catch up with his army. Will please you go, my lord? Rosencrantz asks the still amazed Hamlet at line 30, to which he responds, I'll be with you straight, go a little before. And they just leave him there. So I've always thought that was fun. They're supposed to be guarding him. And okay, Hamlet, time to go. Actually, I want to talk to myself for a while. Can you guys you're coming though, right? Yeah, I'm totally gonna I need to talk to myself. Can you? Okay, thanks, bye. And they just let him do. They're supposed to be guarding him he's their prisoner, and they just leave because he wants to talk to. Anyway, I think it's funny. And we then get, if it's in your edition of the book, we get Hamlet's final soliloquy. This is the last of the many times, 7 or so times that Hamlet talks to himself. Specifically, what we've got here is the "how all occasions do inform against me" speech. How all occasions do inform against me and spur my dull revenge. In other words, wow, everything really reminds me of the fact that I haven't gotten around to getting revenge yet. From there, Hamlet discourses on a couple of things we've heard from him before. This difference between people and the other animals, or between people and God, and where humans fit in this term, in this sense of being above the other animals but below God and the angels. Hamlet compared his mother to a beast in 2 Solid Flesh soliloquy in 1.2, a beast that once discourse of reason would have mourned longer, comparing her to an animal again, with this, eyes without feeling without sight, smelling sans all, or else a sickly part of one true sense could not so mope, when he's going off on her in 3.4, the idea of animals being automatons with no spirit, all instinct and no thought or reason. To Ophelia also, he had that, what should such fellows as I do, crawling between earth and heaven, during the rejection of Ophelia, the get thee to a nunnery fight in 3.1. Most eloquently, he had in the "what a piece of work is a man" speech in 2.2, talking about mankind, humans, as the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals, how like an angel in apprehension, how like a god. We were like an angel, like a god, but not quite the same. Merely at the end of the day, only a quintessence of dust, as he puts it. So we are this weird thing that is, maybe looks on the outside, right? There's on the outside, on the inside again. Looks on the outside like a god or an angel, minus the wings. The biblical idea that humans were made in God's image, that we superficially resemble. If we could see God or an angel, they would look like us. But really, what we are is like the other animals, in the sense that we need to eat and sleep and go to the bathroom, and can be wounded with weapons and poisons and hot and cold in a way that divine beings cannot. Hamlet continues about this, with this people as in between animals and angels thing here. What is a man if his chief good and market of his time be but to sleep and feed a beast no more? So he expands on this idea, saying, well, maybe the answer is not the same for everyone. As far as this, which are we more like, the animals or the angels? Maybe the answer is different depending on the decisions you make, on what you choose to do with your time. If the chief good and market of your time is but to sleep and feed, then you might as well be an animal, or no different from the other animals, if all you do is eat and sleep. But the implication here is, if you choose to do something more noble than that with your time here in this world, you can get ever closer to the angels up there. Sure, he that made us with such large discourse, looking before and after, in other words, God making us with, in Hamlet's great phrase, large discourse, extensive language, in other words, taking everything into consideration, looking before and after, with expert reasoning, gave us not that capability and godlike reason to fust in us unused, the oft cited bit of reasoning that, well, why did God give us reason and logic and brains that could use those things if he didn't want us to use them? Often an argument often deployed against, I guess, more fundamentalist theologies. If we can prove this such and such a religious principle wrong with logic and reason, why shouldn't we do it? Why did God give us, so the saying goes, brains if he didn't want us to use them? Now, the irony here, or I guess one of the many ironies, is that the ability to use logic hasn't done Hamlet himself very much good so far in the play, right? All he does with this very logical and very smart brain of his is talk himself out of, come up with reasons to talk himself out of doing what he's supposed to do. Ironically, an animal, would have gotten revenge, much faster. If Hamlet were a dog instead of a genius, this would be a much shorter play. You kick a dog, it gets revenge immediately. It doesn't philosophize about it for 5 acts. Now, whether it be bestial oblivion, in other words, being as dumb as an animal, Hamlet continues in line 40, or some craven scruple of thinking too precisely on the event, a thought which quartered hath but 1 part wisdom and ever 3 parts coward. In other words, thinking too much about something is only 25% smart and 75% dumb or cowardly. It's more cowardice than reason to think too much about something. Possibly here Hamlet has his decision in 3.3 on the brain here, his decision not to kill Claudius because he was praying. At the time, his logic checked out. He had from the ghost's own mouth that how recently someone has prayed affects how long they have to spend in purgatory or hell or wherever the ghost is. But it frustrated us, the audience, emotionally. Even though Hamlet's logic checked out, our gut wanted to call BS on it. We don't care about your logical proofs. We call BS on them. You're just scared. Shut up and do what you're supposed to do. Hamlet is puzzled by how he hasn't gotten around to it yet. I do not know why yet I live to say this things to do, so that I have cause and will and strength and means to do it. He observes in around line 45. And he finally takes as his example, as the thing that shames him for not having gotten around to the revenging yet, this army of such mass and charge in line 47. So we have here an echo of Hamlet's shame at the actor's passion back in 2.2. What's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? What would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? Hamlet felt at that point shamed. This is in the rogue and peasant slave soliloquy that closes 2.2. Hamlet felt shame that this actor is able to get up so much emotion for a story that's not even real, a made-up story, whereas Hamlet, whose real dad was really murdered, hasn't been able to get up enough passion, an equal amount of passion, to get around to the revenging, yet curiously calling himself unpregnant of my cause, and a great phrase that informs the way that ideas of conception in the genital sense, or of gender, inform everyone's language here. So now this is sort of part two of a similar dynamic. Here, what shames Hamlet is the army going off to fight about nothing. Witness this army of such mass and charge, led by a delicate and tender prince, i.e. Fortinbras, whose spirit with divine ambition puffed makes mouths at the invisible event. So they're so ambitious that they make faces at the idea of dying in a battle. It doesn't bother them at all, because they are possessed of what Hamlet calls divine ambition. Ambition being spoken about as a good thing, as a positive, as a virtue, is unusual in Shakespeare generally. It's usually condemned. Macbeth's tragic flaw is usually said to be ambition. Hamlet and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, when they first run into each other back in 2.2, take turns dismissing ambition as something that is not to be regarded, something that people should work to not have. Here, Hamlet calls it divine. Perhaps most significantly of all, ambition is when he's praying or attempting to pray in 3.3. Ambition is cited by Claudius as one of the effects for which I did the murder. My crown, mine own ambition, and my queen. Here, suddenly, ambition is good, as it causes this army to expose what is mortal and unsure to all that fortune, death, and danger dare, even for an eggshell. In other words, they're going to risk their lives over something empty, something unimportant. This is not the only time Shakespeare uses eggshell to symbolize such an idea. The Fool, for example, uses it to taunt Lear about giving away his kingdom and thereby all his power and respect in King Lear, comparing his now worthless crown to an eggshell. Hamlet sums it all up in starting in line 53. Rightly to be great is not to stir without great argument, but greatly to find quarrel in a straw when honor's at the stake. In other words, true greatness, he says here, and for the first time, it doesn't reside in needing a reason to stir, to fight, to get your dander up, to be aggressive, but rather in finding quarrel in a straw when honor's at the stake. In other words, fighting about nothing, the willingness to fight about nothing, about a straw, when honor's at the stake. And finishes off the speech by vowing, "Oh, from this time forth, my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth." After observing that these 20,000 men for a fantasy and trick of fame are going to, quote, fight for a plot whereon the numbers cannot try the cause, which is not tomb and continent enough to hide the slain. In other words, they're going to fight over a scrap of land that isn't even big enough to bury all of the people who are going to die in the battle for it, which is a great figure of speech, great line. And vowing immediately after that, from this time forth, my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth. Now, we've heard this from Hamlet before. At this point, he is, thinks he is protesting too much, like the player queen in the play within the play. He has vowed that, okay, this time I'm really going to get revenge. I really mean it this time. It barely affects us by this late point in the play. We've heard it from him so much. What we are, and plus, how is he even supposed to do that? He's about to board a ship to England and be assassinated. But what stands out more to us is, well, now might be the place to introduce the fact that this speech, that this scene is of varying lengths. So real quick, Hamlet was first printed in 1603 in what's called the Bad Quarto, a much shorter version of the play in which many lines are different from the famous version. Most infamously, the play's most famous line is rendered as "to be or not to be, there's the point," rather than the more universally recognized "to be or not to be, that is the question." And then in 1605, in a second quarto that much more closely represents the text we have today, and then presumably authoritatively in the 1623 first folio, what was supposed to be the final editions of all of Shakespeare's plays collected in one book, collected by his friends and his publishers, and put out. The first version of the complete works of William Shakespeare, put out just 7 years after his death. Now, this scene in not only the Bad Quarto, which omits a ton of stuff, but also in the first folio, is much shorter. Hamlet does not even appear in it. It ends right after. It only contains that tiny exchange between Fortinbras and the captain. It was only the second quarto that includes the conversation between Hamlet and the captain and the "how all occasions do inform against me" soliloquy. For the rest of the 17th century, it was often printed in a sort of compromise version where the soliloquy is cut, but the conversation about the battle over the scrap of land, the worthless scrap of land between Hamlet and the Norwegian captain, is retained. So, because this speech did not appear in the 1623 first folio, we want to ask ourselves, why not? Was this a printer's error? Was it a cut for length? Or did, at some point between 1605 and his death, did Shakespeare himself remove it in subsequent tinkering with the play between the 1605 good quarto and Shakespeare's own passing in 1616? Did he decide to cut this speech? Would he not want it to be here as we read it today? We have to ask ourselves, if so, why? Now, it could have just been, he thought, well, it's not as good as Hamlet's other soliloquies. They see Hamlet on stage by himself. They're going to be expecting me to top "to be or not to be," and this scene's. This speech is good, but not that good. Or you could have thought it was repetitive. All of this stuff about people and God and animals and being shamed by examples is stuff Hamlet has said before. Or he could have decided, this isn't who Hamlet is. This is not something he would say. That idea is persuasive to me. I mean, the praise of ambition, the idea that greatness lies in, quote, finding quarrel in a straw when honor's at the stake, that Hamlet, this very philosophical, very logical guy, would genuinely think it's an admirable thing to fight about nothing just when it's a matter of honor or of ambition. Um, reminds me of in the All the World's a Stage speech from As You Like It. The soldier, full of strange oaths, bearded like the pard, jealous and honor, sudden and quick and quarrel, seeking the bubble, reputation, even in the cannon's mouth, charging right into the cannons for the sake of his reputation. If even the melancholy Jaques of that play dismisses such a fellow as foolish, it's very hard to believe that Hamlet would admire that sort of behavior. Now, he could be trying to psych himself up here. This could be fixed in the delivery. The actor playing Hamlet could do it in a way that makes it clear that Hamlet is, speaking of straws, that Hamlet here is grasping at them rhetorically and logically speaking, trying to say anything he can think of to psych himself up, but we can, in the playing, tell by his face that he doesn't really believe it. Certainly, a lot of this speech seems uncharacteristic, based on, now granted, a lot about this guy changes over the course of the 5 acts, but no matter how much we change, right, no matter how much we and Hamlet does quip about this, I'm not the guy I used to be idea. Whether it's no, not I never gave you aught to Ophelia when she tries to give him back his presents in 3.1, the implication being that guy who used to be your boyfriend is gone. I'm a completely different person now because of how much I've been through. Or to the, these words are not mine, no, nor mine now, exchange with Claudius in the next scene in 3.2, right before the play within the play. So on the one hand, yes, who Hamlet is does change over the course of the play, so much so that there may even be a joke about his age, a sort of time warp effect, that he's aged 10 years, even though only 4 months have gone by, when we finally find out how old he is in Act 5, Scene 1. And yet, no matter how much we change, there is still, I would like to think, and most of us would like to think, something about us that's still us, right? Whether we're 8 years old or 18 or 25 or 40 or whatever. And Hamlet has always seemed to me to be a guy who wouldn't admire or praise the idea that dulce et decorum est and all that. So possibly the speech removed for that reason, or it could have just been an error. What do I know? And certainly, if we're going to argue about Hamlet's politics, or the issue of claiming Hamlet for one type of person or the other in today's political terms of liberal or conservative, since he seems to transcend those categories. On the one hand, he's a philosophy obsessed, logic obsessed, college nerd whose favorite pastime is to make jokes that go over other people's heads and make fun of them for being stupid. But at the same time, he is, in some scenes more than others, a fire and brimstone religious fundamentalist, excoriating everyone for their sins. So whether we take it as who Hamlet really is or not who Hamlet really is, the idea that he finds anything worthy of praise, finds anything admirable in fighting for the sake of fighting and wars for the sake of wars, just as a sort of excuse to demonstrate virtue or bravery or military acumen. That would be a big, a large element in who we really think, psychologically speaking, this guy is, psychologically and politically. One last observation, given that this is Hamlet's last soliloquy, the last time he talks to himself, we might observe that all of the times Hamlet is alone on stage, all of the times Hamlet is alone on stage, himself is the only guy he talks to. He never talks to the other person that people often talk to when they're alone, i.e. God. The act of prayer plays a central role in Act 3, Scene 3. We see Claudius praying and Hamlet deciding not to kill him for that reason, and closing with the irony that Claudius's prayer turns out to have been inauthentic or at least ineffective. This might remind us that Hamlet, though he is from first to last by all indications a very religious guy, very concerned with what God does or does not want him to do, what God does or doesn't approve of other people doing. If we ask ourselves, well, a very religious person is talking while they're by themselves, what are they probably doing? The first answer that pops into our heads, of course, is praying. It bears mention that Hamlet never once does this. All of the speech he makes, all of the speeches he makes while he's alone are to himself / the audience, or possibly, depending on whether we believe he knows he's being spied on in Act 3, Scene 1, with to be or not to be, possibly for the benefit of the people he knows are spying on him. He talks to himself about God a great deal, but he never once talks to God. Give me a sign, give me the strength, let me know what you want me to do, any of that. He talks to himself about God, but curiously, never to God. Another thing that we might notice after this, the last time that Hamlet talks to himself. So he's going to leave the play for a while. I spoke earlier about Act 4 being something of a Hamlet vacuum. The next 3 scenes, 4.5, 4.6, and 4.7, are the only place in the play where we get 3 consecutive scenes that Hamlet himself is not in, we finally get to see what is on everybody else's mind in the whoosh Hamlet vacuum, this long stretch where the prince gets sucked out of the play that bears his name and that revolves around him so much, right? Even in the rare scenes where he does not appear, the other characters are inevitably talking about what's up with him and what's on what may or may not be on his mind. In the next scene, Act 4, Scene 5, our attention turns finally to what is on poor Ophelia's mind and how we might interpret that. So next video, 4.5, the famous mad scene. See you then.